I don't know why I like it. I just always have.
This is a conscious effort on our part to open the creative envelope, so to speak, in order to entertain you in a more contemporary manner. Even though we call ourselves sports entertainment because of the athleticism involved, the key word in that phrase is entertainment.
Vince McMahon has lost his mind. The man doesn't have it anymore.
We in the WWF think that you, the audience, are quite frankly tired of having your intelligence insulted.
Have you watched the television show lately?
We also think that you're tired of the same old simplistic theory of good guys versus bad guys. Therefore, we've embarked upon a far more innovative and contemporary creative campaign that is far more invigorating and extemporaneous than ever before.
Because while Doink the Clown had a green hair and a rubber nose, Stone Cold Steve Austin was drinking his first beer in ECW, damn you. Oh, we got attitude. You got nothing, man.
As the times have changed, so have we.
Welcome back to Beyond the Beermat, the podcast that is in a harder fight with technology than Terry Funk has been in his entire career, and we are refusing to go with the I Quit route on this. We're going to still produce the best wrestling podcast content you can name without having to tap out. My name is Stuart Quigley. Alongside me, I've got, once again, live via the wonderful world of technology, it's Bill.
We stopped without his mobile, wouldn't we?
I mean, I've got to be honest with you, in terms of all the things that have been shot up in terms of value over the last couple of weeks, I would rather have Wi-Fi than toilet paper any day of the week.
What about beer?
That's also very hard there, I must say. And in the days where we can't actually venture outside our doorsteps without wandering into a Class 5 lockdown stage quarantine, we thought it'd be good actually to get some of the stories that we've had in our previous Renegade days, the halcyon days as it were, where we were able to actually not just go out of the house, but go to America and visit actual Wrestlemania.
It was a dream, wasn't it? The boyhood dream was realised.
Let's forget winning the title at WrestleMania, just being there is all what it's all about. And this is slight divergent in terms of what we're talking about. This episode might not necessarily be the hard-hitting wrestling content that you're used to. This is almost like a travel guide to America, but also a drinking guide with some wrestling stories scattered here and there. I think the first thing we need to do is we need to break down that we've been to 2 different WrestleManias. You also have been to a Royal Rumble on top of that, so we'll touch on that as well briefly. But in terms of the cities that we've been to and visited in and amongst this, it's Houston and Miami. They are 2 big cities when it comes to not just WrestleMania, but actually visiting the cities in general.
Like you said, I went to the Royal Rumble in 2010 as well. Atlanta, another huge city. Great place. Absolutely phenomenal place. Before
we get to the actual nitty-gritty of the Houston WrestleMania 25 experience, it was a case of, I don't know about for you, but for me it was this whole thing of, and this is again one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast, if we ever actually are allowed out of the house again, WrestleMania fundamentally is, if you're a wrestling fan, it's something you've got to do on the checklist.
Ah, big time. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember saying to my parents I could afford to go to WrestleMania 25, and I was about 8 or 9 at the time, and that was on my bucket list, and we went. I think that was the first trip I had abroad without my family. It was good. It was an eye-opener to the world, let's put it that way.
Not for you, for the world.
The whole world.
Exactly. And also as well, this brings down another thing, which is that I don't think this is the case anymore. This is something that WWE used to do, and I do think they will do in the future, but unfortunately for us, it's too far in the future that we might not be able to pack our Zimmer frames into a travel case and get over there. We're talking about like round numbers, big numbers like a 20, a 25, a 50, heaven forbid, 100. When we get to these sort of milestones, they tend to pull out the bag a little bit more, or at least that's what we thought.
Yeah, to be fair, the size of the show and the way they advertised it, and even just the promotional post, it looked the real deal. It's just some of the matches did not deliver. Talking about you, Paul.
Big Show wasn't there, was it? Oh yeah, he was. He was in the semi-main event.
To be fair, I've watched that match back, and it's not that bad.
No.
It's just the fact in front of Undertaker and Shawn Michaels that they made it look bad.
Indeed. And by the way, if anyone listening to this wants an in-depth analysis of that pay-per-view, we did that in Beyond the Beermat 25, so go back, listen to that for the full actual card breakdown and the entertainment breakdown. But in terms of going over to Houston. The other thing that I found just jaw-dropping as well, in and amongst everything else, is the scale of it that you don't quite understand when you're a wrestling fan in this country. Like, we were in the airport and fucking Honky Tonk Man's already there.
The Honky Tonk, didn't he shove me for a bottle of Coke or something?
I believe there was a conversation that was had whereby it was within sort of listening distance, and at the end of the day, I'm glad we never actually had a direct conversation.
Yeah. I never liked Elvis.
But the Honky Tonk Man we definitely liked.
Oh, I loved him. He was my hero.
Yes, exactly. Right up until that moment.
Yeah, that's it. And I turned my back on him for good at that point.
But like in terms of, you go to not just WrestleMania, if we'd have been slightly younger, if this had been maybe 5 years before even, you go to wherever the event's being held and there's not necessarily that much on at the time. But even when we went, and this has exploded massively in the 11 years since, you've got so much that you want to go and see. But even at 25, there was like events going on every day, and there were still indie shows running at the time as well.
We were sort of on the cusp, weren't we? I mean, now it's full of, how can I put it? It's full of day-tripping tourists, isn't it now? If you look at the front 10, 15 rows, there's all these different European flags all over the place.
Yeah.
Whereas when we went, we were sort of, there were people from the UK there, but there weren't that many. We were on the lower block where we just sat there there were Texans around us, weren't there?
That's true, actually, yeah.
So yeah, I think we went at the right time.
Oh, it was definitely the perfect mix in terms of, I was saying about going to WrestleMania just to sort of tick it off a list. A lot of people going now, that's all they're in it for, is ticking it off a list, as opposed to going there because it's something that we've wanted to do for a very long period of time.
Exactly, yeah. It's like a trip to Mecca, isn't it?
That is genuinely like the holy land, as it were, is getting to WrestleMania, and especially like the one we went to, we were expecting big things, and just in terms of the other things that you can do there, this is one of the first years that Access was going on as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was really good, wasn't it? Because, I mean, we went on the Friday, and Shawn Michaels and Triple H were doing a Q&A halfway through the session. There's no chance in hell that'd happen there. They'd be on the private autograph stand where you've got to pay an extra $100 to meet them there.
There was an element of extra money that could be made in terms of elongating the WrestleMania weekend into an actual weekend, and now, especially with NXT, you've got so much going on there, because we didn't have that at the time, but what we did have is Ring of Honor, we did have other indie shows going on. It's funny because at the time wrestling shows were a lot shorter and there was a lot less of them. But even at the time, we were talking about, if you went to like SmackDown and the Access and the Hall of Fame and WrestleMania itself and then the Raw afterwards, even at that point, we were looking at each other going, you could actually get burnt out quite quick. So it's quite funny how the solution to that was just add more wrestling.
Yeah, you mentioned the indie shows there. If you look now, every UK indie star under the sun was heading to Florida for that weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know exactly how many indie promotions base their year around, or base their calendar around WrestleMania, but it says quite a lot.
Yeah, I think one of the things as well that's happened with WrestleMania weekend this year being changed in such a dramatic way is that a lot of indie wrestlers, promotions, podcasts even, they have like these fanfare events for all sorts, and you know what, we'll be there in 2020 or whatever, but everyone's lost a lot of money.
Yeah, they have. It's one of them, isn't it? That I guess some of the bigger shows have got insurance, so it'll cover them, but... And the likes of the wrestlers flying out, they're relatively small names on the grand scheme of things. They're not going to be covered for flights and things like that. So yeah, it's going to cost a big time this year, but times have changed since we went.
And also as well, one of the things that was going on during Access, that it used to be a thing, it's not a thing now, at least as far as I'm aware, but if there was ever a time to bring it back, do you remember like I don't know what they called it, the like Xbox gaming challenge thing, where it's like Kofi Kingston would win it every year?
So Jimmy Hart was his manager for one evening.
Yeah, that's great.
That was brilliant. They do that up, down, down thing now, don't they?
But I'm just saying, in terms of like what we're looking at now, with everything that's sort of been closed off, this is something that we saw back in the day, and they sort of phased it out because no one wants to watch wrestlers play computer games, and suddenly that's back and very popular.
Yes, funny that, isn't it?
Things go in very much circles, not just in terms of everything.
Exactly. I was just going to use the exact same phrase.
Yeah. And also as well, you mentioned Shawn Michaels and Triple H being like as part of an autograph session. We queued up for these autograph sessions ourselves, not necessarily knowing who we were going to get because they were going to change halfway through.
Yes. I don't know whether we got the raw end of the deal here, and I would guess we didn't. We were queuing up for Ted DiBiase and Cody Rhodes, weren't we?
Mm-hmm.
I think we were in the queue for that, and who turned up? SmackDown's #1 cover. They said, yeah.
I'm not going to lie, like, at the time we marked out as if, like, yeah, that would have been good. But basically, we could have been all in straight away with AEW right there and then that many years ago.
That's true, mate. But the one good thing to come out of that is Mark Henry had a go at me. I keep meaning to call him out and settle this once and for all one day, Mark.
If that is your real name.
Sorry, that shouldn't have made me laugh so much, really did. Yeah, man, we're waiting in the queue. I take a picture of the guy because he's like a huge superstar. There you go, mate. I've got a nice picture of him, to be fair, but when I got his signature off him, I should have punched him out there and then, shouldn't I?
You could have been the world's strongest man.
Exactly, I would have been the world's strongest man at that point.
Indeed, indeed. And the only thing that and I do think we did talk about this on the WrestleMania 25 podcast, which you definitely need to go back and listen to, is the idea that you could have done commentary if you had the special extra VIP tag.
Yeah, I regret not doing that, because someone offered us their pass, didn't they, as well?
I don't think they did at the time. I think we were talking about asking someone, but we definitely should have.
I thought that Beckham guy asked us.
Possible. The only reason I say that is just purely because I think if someone would have offered it to us, we would have done it.
Oh, I'd have bought it, I'm a coward. Unless it's when I find Mark Henry when I become the...
That's true, actually, yeah, that's very true.
Strongest, mate.
I don't even know if they do this in Access now, and I don't think they do. It feels like in the early years they're experimenting with what kind of fan experience they were going to give us. And in this instance, it was you sat down at the commentators with who were the commentators again? Was it like Josh Matthews and?
I've got a feeling JR was there one day. We weren't there on that day, but I've got a feeling JR was on the commentary.
That does ring a bell, yeah. And you had a choice of like 3 matches you could commentate over. I don't remember them being great matches, to be perfectly honest.
It doesn't matter. It's only just chat bollocks with JR, that's enough, isn't it?
He can no-sell my jokes any day.
Exactly. Just talk about his Lone Star beer and barbecue sauce.
And with all that build-up then, all the events that we could go to, all the counting down the days, both when we're at home and also while we're there, all the nightlife that we saw, all the beers that we drank, all the ridiculous food proportions that we were given that you had to ask whether they were for 2 people or for 1. They were for 1. There is a reason why Americans are that big.
That's a true fact, that is, by the way.
Yes. And then you get to the day and the event itself. Now, we passed the time away the only way you can do in that sort of state, which is sat by the pool drinking beers, playing wrestling themes from iPod speakers.
Oh yeah, that didn't annoy anyone.
No, definitely not. And there's a couple of things here that I wanted to mention that is truly unique to what I would call the British fan experience, which is A, going to WrestleMania and watching it at what you would call a decent time.
Oh, man, that makes such a difference. We must have gone to the arena about 5 o'clock?
Something like that.
Yeah, so rather than sit in a bar for 4 hours and then run the endurance test at 12, it's so good to end up at that time relaxing. Brilliant.
The fact that it was just daylight is one thing.
Oh, yeah, man. I just remember walking up to that arena thinking, this is the Champions League final of wrestling. And as a Birmingham fan, I'm never going to see the Champions League final. It's just a special atmosphere walking up, and the atmosphere around the arena. Everyone's there for the same thing, and you've got the tailgate parties, and it's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
It is quite surreal in every sense of the word when you walk through the gates and then ultimately the arena itself. And then you look upon everything, and then I remember when we walked into the Reliant, and then we were going to like where you get to your seats, you come out of the thing, and you can actually see the setup and everything. And I don't know about you, but given the grandeur of everything that you've got in your head, it's kind of weird that you walk in and it feels like just another show there.
I'll be honest, I know this sounds weird. I was disappointed with that stage. All the lights are off, aren't they? Because all you see on TV is lights and the grandeur and this, that and the other. And you walk in, and when it's not on TV, all the lights are off. There's nothing on the screen. There's no build-up. You just sat there and thought, this is a bit, It
was effectively a house show with like just slightly better around the ring dressing.
It was, yeah. I think we've said this before, but it's a completely different atmosphere watching it live and even at WrestleMania. But the amount of people in the arena, what was it, 72,000?
Yeah.
Something like that. It's something special.
Well, this is the thing, because the way we're talking about this and the way I'm describing it now, I'm not trying to take away from anything. I'm trying to actually say or suggest or lead up to this idea that it actually means more for the fact that you walk into this arena and on first glance, it can look like, oh, it's just a regular old show in a regular old arena. But the crowd and the atmosphere and the people there, the intent and the will from everyone around you to have a good time, it's infectious and it carries everything. It's like a living thing within the whole arena in itself. And specifically, we've said this many, many times on many different podcasts, not just the WrestleMania 25 one, but the Shawn Michaels Undertaker match, one of the reasons why I put it over so many things is because of the way the crowd carried me, not them, the crowd as well.
I've seen plenty of wrestling matches live over the years. I've never seen so many people invested in a match as much as that.
Yeah.
And I know I've read all the reviews on the internet, I've seen people's opinion, but that's one of, if not the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. They were people watching that show on TV. The atmosphere in the arena made that match 3 times better.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it was half and half Shawn Michaels, half Undertaker. And just the just the atmosphere in there, every close pinfall.
Yeah.
I mean, this is back in the day where everybody didn't kick out of everyone's finisher. That was saved for the odd match here and there. And that was, how many times did he kick out? He kicked out with Tombstone and Last Ride and whatnot. It's just something special about that match. The crowd made it even better.
And that's the thing that, like, you take home with you. You get this idea in your head of what WrestleMania is going to be. And ultimately, we're talking about a show that kind of disappointed us in the end and in the moment. And as we walked out of the arena, we felt a real sort of low blow.
I was pretty angry walking out of that arena.
Indeed.
It was the main event, wasn't it? The whole storyline was built into this. And again, you look at the crowd on the TV, and the whole arena was the same. It was, when the pinfall went out, it was. But one positive thing coming out of that afterwards, I was really angry, and then went for a triple quarter pounder. It made me happy again.
Oh yeah, Whataburger was very crowded that day. I will say that much.
Whataburger, honestly, man, what a restaurant! That's what I want to say.
You looked at it and you just went, Whataburger.
That might be the greatest fast food place I've ever been into.
And then obviously, as we're saying, you come out of WrestleMania and you've got this experience of having gone and done it all, and then you do get this slight sort of sour taste in your mouth at the end of it. So then obviously what the next thing you go and do is you go to Atlanta a couple of years later to watch your Royal Rumble. That's standard.
Well, the thing is, that wasn't a couple of years later. It was 9 months later.
Jeez.
Well, I saw 2/3 of the Shawn Michaels Undertaker storyline play out.
That's spectacular.
I wish I should have gone to the other one and completed the set, shouldn't I?
Indeed.
That all started as a joke. We went down the pub after I got back, and I said to one of my friends, we should go to the Royal Rumble next, as a joke. Except the more beers flowed, and the more we looked into it, I went, yes, let's do it.
That is the kind of ultimate truism to wrestling in terms of, like, no matter how much as a fan you go, and no matter what you spend, no matter what distances you travel, and no matter how much it disappoints you, at the end of the day when you're sat back at home, you're just going, yeah, I've got to do it again as soon as possible.
Oh man, it's like a drug. If I didn't have a mortgage and a family to pay for, I'd be doing it every year. It's so good. Can I swear, it's nothing to do with the wrestling, by the way. The wrestling is just going on.
It's just happening in the background.
It's just happening. It's like cricket and football. It's just happening.
Yeah. So then, in terms of tales from Atlanta, if you want to label this part of the podcast that, is there anything about that you'd say stuck out in terms of comparing it to Houston?
I'll be honest, I've been to a few places across the world, and I generally find that the non-touristy places are friendlier and better places than tourist locations. Honestly, Atlanta's one of the coolest cities I've ever been to. A slightly different atmosphere at the Royal Rumble to WrestleMania. And like I was saying before about the wrestling tourists turn up there, we did not meet any other people from the UK there. It was literally the 3 of us, and I know it was the Royal Rumble. It's more like a house show at the NEC or Raw or SmackDown, because the arena's just an arena. It's not an NFL stadium.
I don't know if the same will be true now, because I think we've got to a point where a lot of the people that had WrestleMania circled on the calendar have already sort of written that off once. I don't know about you, but I tend to find that when you get into a conversation with people, if they've already been to a WrestleMania, they generally tend to have been to something else, whether it's another WrestleMania or another pay-per-view, full stop. So the gateway seems to have opened at this point, and I imagine if you go to this Royal Rumble, for example, you would have got that explosion of everyone that you didn't necessarily see then.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to make the Royal Rumble the second big event now, aren't they? So they're running it from baseball stadiums. I think they're doing the same next year, aren't they? So they tried to push that as the second biggest show of the year. It always has been on my calendar. There's two events that I'll go out my way to watch, and it's the Royal Rumble and WrestleMania. So, yeah, I mean, the bigger they make it, the more people from the UK and Europe are going to fly over and see it. It's a big show.
And then, obviously, we go from WrestleMania 25 in Houston to the Royal Rumble 9 months later in Atlanta. And then, obviously, there is a bit of a gap. We do get there. But to a certain point, it all has to come down to, what are you going there for? What is it that's going to make you sign on that bottom line and decide that I'm going to pool my resources however many months in advance to this? Because this is another thing that needs to be pointed out. If we are going to plan a trip to WrestleMania from outside of the US, you have to plan this so far in advance, you have no idea what the card's going to be. Well, this is the point, yes, thank you for leading me on. We'd said this before. If The Rock fought John Cena at any event, we would be on that plane. And then the day after WrestleMania 27, they made that match official. And so I believe on the Tuesday after WrestleMania 27, which would have been the day after Raw, we had the conversation. It was like, book it in now.
Oh, yeah. But we nearly went to the most asked WrestleMania of all time, didn't we? WrestleMania 27, when it was rumoured it was going to be Rock versus John Cena. This
is what I'm saying in terms of we're not entirely sure of the card, so you kind of have to jump on and hope. Whereas this time we actually knew.
Yeah, we did. We booked it for the main event. Let's not lie.
Yeah.
We went for Rock Cena. We got what we wanted. We got the result we all wanted.
No, we didn't.
What do you mean?
I think if I elaborated further, this podcast would be 3 hours long. But in terms of an event, in terms of a match made in heaven, once in a lifetime, they're definitely never going to do it again. Definitely.
Exactly.
On top of all of that, we got to go to Miami.
One of the coolest places on the planet.
Yeah.
That's a fact. That's not up into many places. That is a fact. That is the coolest place.
Mm-hmm. The thing that got me was you get off the plane, you get to the hotel, check in, sorted, outside, on the beach. It starts raining and everyone fucks off inside other than the English.
Yeah, I'll just intervene there. What happened within 25 minutes of getting to that beach? Our esteemed colleague was kicking sand over people on it.
Yes, there is a part of this podcast that we will have to reconvene at some point, and maybe, just maybe, the second part of this podcast will be just him clarifying which of us are telling shit and at what point to try and redeem his character. But we're on the beach playing football, proper football this is, not that wanky rugby style stuff. Yeah. And sand may have been kicked over via the inner immediate distance of certain women, shall we say.
That's why you should stick to playing American football.
I genuinely thought you were going to say that's why you should stick to playing hand sports, but that would have led to a very...
I was going to say that's why you should stick to wrestling.
Yeah, well, wrestling of a different kind, shall we say. But it's just that thing of like, take WrestleMania out of it, which is really hard in a podcast where we're talking about going to WrestleMania. It is one of those ideal locations, and in that moment, and in that thing, it was just, as a trip, as a destination, it's just incredible. And then when you factor in, not only have we had 3 years since we've been to WrestleMania with access and everything, they've doubled down on everything that we could possibly want to go and see and do. Because we had access, but we also had the autograph sessions that we went and saw, and we also went to meet what would soon to be future tag team champions individually, Daniel Bryan and then Kane.
Oh, that was unbelievable, man. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, Daniel Bryan wouldn't hold my flag, would he?
No, he wouldn't.
That's not a euphemism, by the way. That's
so you're going back to the beach, yeah?
Perhaps he thought it was some dodgy organisation or something.
Well, I mean,
right.
I was going to say perhaps he knew.
Yeah, we met Kane the same day.
Yeah, it was a strange one because, like, Daniel Bryan at the time, this was, for those that are losing track of context, just in the run-up to WrestleMania 28, when he was doing the heel run of, like,
he was the world champion.
Yeah, no, yeah, but,
the
like,
world championship was sat on the table, wasn't it?
It was. There was a temptation to pick it up, I'm not going to lie. But it was the whole idea of, like, him doing the yes gimmick for the heel version. Still one of my favourite versions of Daniel Bryan. But it was this idea that he was a guy that had come up from everything that he'd done prior to WWE, all the work he'd put in, starting wrestling at 19, doing everything he'd done through Ring of Honor, getting the actual call, then the NXT bullshit, getting fired and coming back, and sort of working his way and defying all the odds up to this point. And then I'm sat in front of him, just going, hello, I like you. I'll just put it this way. I wasn't quite as awestruck when I was sat next to Funaka.
That's because Daniel Bryan's about 4'7".
Yeah, Daniel Bryan's actually smaller than Funaka. That's what.
You intimidated him.
Clearly. Then we go and queue again in a separate sort of event and bump into Kane. Can I just actually say one random thing that's just popped into my head that everyone will forget? In that shop where they were doing the signings, the biggest, or at least one of the biggest merchandise items was the Funkasaurus shirt.
I honestly don't remember that.
Yeah.
Probably for good reason, but I don't remember that.
Yeah, it was one of these things where he'd only just sort of debuted, and everyone was, at the time, really on board with the gimmick. That changed very quickly. I think in the entire time he was doing that gospel segment with the ladies from the church, like everyone turned on him.
Do you remember how long that segment went on?
I think it's like 20 minutes, unfortunately.
Yeah, 20 minutes. It's 21 minutes too long.
But at the time, genuinely, I remember this now just coming back to me. Like, there was a big deal of that.
I can't believe I never went for a beer during that segment. That's unbelievable.
It might be something good, I don't know.
The only good thing I missed out on was a Budweiser there.
Well, very true. And I tell you what, when you're watching WrestleMania 36 on Saturday/Sunday, you'll be sitting there thinking, damn, I could do with a 20-minute Funkasaurus section right about now.
2:30 in the morning, yeah, brilliant. Just to lay back to that shop, do you remember queuing and that American guy was talking to us and he asked us if we knew Lord Alfred Hayes? We're all neighbours in Britain, aren't we? It's just a small little village where we all live on the same road.
I did know William Regal, though, definitely. We are very close friends. But don't ring him up, because we play this game where he pretends not to know me. But then, so we've got the autograph sessions out the way. We do revisit Access, which this time had so much more different stuff involved. We had Hell in a Cell was there. There was a Undertaker graveyard, which didn't have Alan Jones in there at this point.
Alan Jones? You can't get kayfabe on this show.
Clearly. But just in terms of the expansion, what did you think from 25 to 28? Because it was definitely like twice as big, if not bigger.
Yeah, it was. It was different, wasn't it? We had the Q&A with Shawn Michaels and Triple H at 25. There was none of that at 28, was there? The nearest we got was Dolph Ziggler trying to get some attention for himself. On a stand shouted, come and have a picture with me. So, all right, mate. I know you're irrelevant, but calm down.
But there was the other thing as well. Do you remember when we were queuing up and Ezekiel Jackson was doing autographs and then he left? But he left through the crowd, so we did get to sort of shake hands with him.
See, he's sort of irrelevant on the WWE timeline, but that was one of the greatest moments ever for a nobody.
I was always pulling for him after that. He could have been the next big thing. And I don't talk about Brock Lesnar.
We got to hold the WWE Championship again.
That's true, actually. I did have a personal low moment for myself in terms of, at 25 we didn't do the commentary.
Yes.
I think you'll have forgotten this, but at 28 there was a booth where you could go in and sing John Cena's music, and I could have done that without literally batting an eyelid.
I honestly don't remember that. I remember there's a ramp you could have come down and done your own entrance.
Yeah, there were a lot of children there. That would have been very dodgy if I'd have tried that.
I'd have kicked them off the stage and everything. I'd have done the same.
So you wouldn't have waited your turn, you'd have just attacked the child.
Yeah, it's my time to shine, that's right. Billy's time to shine, there we go.
To be fair, that is a very wrestling way of going about it.
Yeah, it is indeed.
So, Access wrapped up and tied in a bow then. One of the things that we're here for, and one of the reasons why we're here fundamentally, is we've got to talk about like the Miami nightlife, as it were, and with the idea of there are extra things going on at 28. I've got to keep this short and I've got to keep this censored, but there are many stories we could tell at this juncture, so just know that there's more to this segment. But we went to a party with Kevin Nash.
We did. Many people have got many stories about nightclubs, and no one's got a better one. They're spending the entire evening with ex-wrestlers. It's great.
For those that are slightly confused, I'm just going to pull back a little on the absolute brags of all time that we've just pulled out there, which is to say that while we were definitely at a party with Kevin Nash, and that is definitely 100% true, it's not like we had him on speed dial. He was just hosting one of his WrestleMania shindigs, and we happened to be in the venue.
This be true. Although we've got DDP's business card somewhere.
Yes, it's not your mama's yoga, definitely.
Exactly, yeah. Our esteemed colleague got invited to one of his yoga sessions, didn't he?
He did. He also had a massive feud / talked in the corner without him hearing about Rob Terry eats chips.
Rob Terry eats a lot of carbs, man.
Yes.
He had 8 bowls of championships on that tape.
Also, as well, speaking of things that you see in person and are mesmerising, and I'm not talking about the appetites of some of these wrestlers, seeing Rhino's thighs in reality, Jesus Christ.
Rhino's quads are the size of two of mine put together, and a third he's found for somewhere.
And then...
Yeah, Rhino's an asshole, right? I should have called him at Cadbury's when he was in my city, but he ran away too quickly.
Another person you should have called it.
No. I was waiting many miles away. But yeah, all I saw was a picture, and he's just ignored me. Very, very angry man, Rhino.
All I'll say is there is something to be said for. You've got Nash, DDP, Hall was there, wasn't there?
No, Hall wasn't there, but X-Pac was there.
X-Pac's the one I'm thinking of, yeah.
X-Pac is a surprisingly tall man. He's bigger than me, and I'm 6 foot. He looks tiny on the telly.
I think this is just to do with relative heights in terms of wrestlers in general, and the idea of, like, when you see these people in person, even the smaller wrestlers look so much bigger as actual human beings. It's fascinating. You've got this idea in your head of how small they are, and they're really not.
No, that's true. Rikishi was in that bar as well.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't the headbangers try and choke Matt out?
Yeah, they did.
I think he paid for the privilege of having two headbangers to choke him.
Not for the first time, I believe, paying for being choked.
Brilliant.
Okay, so we'll probably, like I say, we'll probably revisit, if not this entire trip, but definitely that night in a podcast far in the future. But get to actual WrestleMania at the Sun Life Stadium, and for as much as everything I saw at 25, when you walked into that arena and it was just dark and sort of house showy-ish, this was kind of the opposite, I'm not going to lie. This looked like a big deal.
Yeah, but we had the VIP treatment, didn't we? We were sat in the middle tier, so we got to go into the box section.
Oh yeah, good call.
Completely accidental, but we did it. We had all nice aircon, all those people were burning to death outside. Not Kane wasn't out yet, but they were burning in the sun.
Well, a lot of people sort of had problems with that setup in terms of they were basically sat in a seat where you get there and there's a big fucking palm tree in your way. But from our sort of viewing vantage, it was perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that though. I had based the tickets off the WrestleMania 24 setup, where they had a canopy above the ring, just in case. So I sort of judged that there was going to be something in the way. I don't know why everyone else judged there was going to be something in the way.
No, I need to be on row one.
I know. I need to be close to the palm tree that blocks me.
Basically.
Yeah, but it was a great setup, wasn't it? Again, there was a good buzz and atmosphere outside, and everybody had barbecues at the back of the trailers, blasting John Cena's music out, and
Well,
that was great.
you say that. It would be remiss if I didn't tell the one, so I'll let you tell it, and I'll do the punchline if you want. When I was in the skybox, as we unintentionally, but definitely intentionally ordered, and I can only describe this as being verbally, physically, mentally, and soulfully abused by someone that happens to support Dwayne Johnson.
Oh, man, we can't leave that there. Let's start off with the basics there. What T-shirt were you wearing?
I was wearing a John Cena shirt because I had to be.
You were wearing a green John Cena shirt. You might as well have had a target on your back.
I agree with that.
Yeah. How much did you pay for that shirt?
I don't remember, and I am actually quite sad that I lost it, but I will say this much. I was surprised by the amount that shirt was selling at the time. I was surprised by the amount of people that had it.
Yeah, lots of
Morons.
the kids lost it.
Yeah, I knew you were going to get that.
So a young gentleman walked up to you, said he hadn't watched wrestling for a while. So he asked you, I've been watching the wrestling a little bit, trying to get back in. And John Cena's got those 5 moves. I can't quite remember what they're called. What are the moves called? So you answered with...
Well, they've got the 5-knuckle
It
shuffle.
doesn't matter what the moves are called.
Yeah, I walked into that one big time.
I must admit, you got a crowd around him for that, and about 20 people laughed, including me.
Thanks.
Don't worry, friendo.
I would like to say, and I'm going to skip forward just a touch here, but when we walked out of that arena, there were people like genuinely walking past me with what I can only describe as like football style hatred in their eyes. Like, I've been to very many football games in this country. That's the closest you'll ever feel it in America with sort of wrestling, at least.
Was this sort of after the height of John Cena? So he'd been on the Superman run for years and years and years, and this was sort of the end.
Yes.
So it's like a loaded gun, isn't it? All the people that have been hating Cena for years have finally got what they want, and they took it out on you.
Even if it kills the business for the next decade plus, let's do it.
You might as well have been wearing a Man United shirt in the 90s at that point, and you've just lost the title for the first time in years.
Jesus Christ. First of all, that is bullshit. I would never wear a Man United shirt. Second of all, you get no points for being right when it comes to your opinions in wrestling.
No, this be true. Although everyone that took the piss at you that night was correct.
Bollocks were they. I think time has proven me right. But in terms of like talking about like the end of the show and exiting the show, I am tempted to leave a little few scraps on the table for when Bat decides to give us his riposte, as it were, to basically what is effectively up to this point character defamation. But we talked about the daylight hours, as it were, when it came to WrestleMania 25. When it came to WrestleMania 28, fucking hell, getting out of that was a bit intense. And I can only imagine doubling down on that, the chaos last year at WrestleMania 35, where public transport shut down, and the fact of the matter is that like no one can get out. We got out of Miami by basically waiting 3 hours for a taxi, but at least it was organised.
Yeah, fair play to the police that night. I knew that stadium was in a bit of a dodgy area, which is why I didn't want to walk off. But when they organised the taxi line, fair play to them. Once they sorted the queue out and got the taxis along, they were fairly good when I'll give them the credit.
I mean, if nothing else, we Brits can stand in a queue and wait.
We are the world champions at that.
Indeed. There was one minor, I don't know what you'd call it, potential death situation when a car of 3 lads pulls up and says, I'm going to take you to wherever you want to go, and there's only 1 seat in the car left. Yeah, that's not complete death.
3 frat boys. Yeah, come on, who wants a trip to the middle of nowhere? Yeah, please, mister. What you got? Hypno?
If only, that would have been the good way of going for them. Jeez.
Probably would have been. There was something suspiciously dodgy about it. Although I do think they had a nice Cadillac.
The car was nice, yes. Their intentions were not.
No, well, not indeed.
And I tell you what's always good, regardless of intentions or otherwise, this podcast, Beyond the Beermat, is going to continue to give you as much amazing content as we could possibly put out between now and whenever reality turns to normal. Stay tuned to social media and we'll give you an idea of what we're going to be doing in regard to WrestleMania 36, but we're going to be putting something out regardless of whether it's just 6 hours of us swigging beers from a Skype location and going, yeah, that was alright. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you again very, very soon.